As the title character and tragic hero of this play, it is no surprise that Macbeth is deeply complex, too complex in fact to merely be slapped with the label of villain. All of Shakespeare's tragic heroes have what is known as a fatal flaw, a characteristic that ultimately leads to their downfall. In Macbeth's case, it is commonly thought to be his overwhelming ambition and desire for power. This is coupled, however, with a very guilty conscience, which leads to a lot of inner conflict in the form of soliloquies, a monologue which is spoken aloud to oneself without any other characters hearing it. This allows the audience to feel a little sympathy for Macbeth, because we are aware of the turmoil going on inside his head. Although he commits some truly terrible acts in his pursuit of power, it is important that we recognize and understand the journey his character takes from celebrated war hero to murderous usurper. Let's have a look at this transformation starting from the beginning. Macbeth is first mentioned in Act 1, Scene 2, where a messenger is relaying the outcome of a recent battle to King Duncan. He refers to him as Brave Macbeth, and describes in gory detail how he defeated the king's foe. He unseamed him from the nave to the chops and fixed his head upon our battlements. From this violent description, we can see that Macbeth is no stranger to war, and is certainly not squeamish about taking the lives of those he deems worthy of killing. He is also portrayed as a hero figure that King Duncan holds in high esteem. He calls him, "O valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." Even though Macbeth is not in this scene, it is important because we are learning a lot about what other people think of him before we even get a chance to see or hear him. We can gather from this conversation that Macbeth is essentially the perfect royal subject, and is being placed on a pedestal by his king and country, which makes his actions later on seem even more uncharacteristic. In Act 1, Scene 3, Macbeth stumbles upon the witches with his fellow captain Banquo, and we are able to see how his character changes when the seeds of ambition are sown. The witches promise him that he will be the Thane of Cawdor and King of Scotland, but rather than rejoice at this good news, he is filled with a kind of dread. Banquo mentions that he seems to fear the witch's prophecy, and later Macbeth remarks to himself, "If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair?" This suggests that Macbeth may have already fantasized, however briefly, about sitting on the throne of Scotland, and perhaps even imagined devious scenarios where he could achieve that goal. Now that this dream has the potential to be realized, however, he feels deeply conflicted, as he knows that by usurping the throne, he will be abandoning his squeaky clean reputation, and going down a dark path from which there will be no turning back. It is also noteworthy that Macbeth takes the witch's words much more seriously than Banquo, who dismisses it as a hallucination or a joke. The news of his promotion to Thane of Cawdor only serves to confirm Macbeth's belief in the witch's supernatural powers, as he tells Banquo that they gave the Thane of Cawdor to me. In Shakespearean times, people firmly believed in the existence of supernatural beings, such as witches and ghosts, and had a real fear of them. This would explain why he continues to interpret their prophecies literally throughout the play, rather than questioning their deeper meanings. After Macbeth has opened himself up to the manipulation of the witches, a representation of darkness and evil, he begins to have an aversion for things which symbolize light and the heavens. In Act 1, Scene 4, he says, "Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires." He is now beginning to truly contemplate carrying out the act of regicide, or killing a king, which at the time was the greatest sin you could commit, not only because the king was the head of a country, but because people believed that the ruler was appointed by God, a principle known as divine right. By killing Duncan, then, he would be flagrantly challenging a spiritual power and condemning his soul to hell. Again, this is why the concept of the witches is so important. Macbeth needs to feel that a supernatural presence, however dark, is on his side in order to justify taking the crown. Once Duncan arrives at Macbeth's castle, however, he appears to have had a change of heart, and in another tortured soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 7, he admits that Duncan has been extremely generous and favorable towards him. And additionally, he is here as a guest under Macbeth's roof, so to use this trust against him would be doubly treacherous. This does not mean that he is against the idea completely, however. He says, "I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition." He is acknowledging that to kill Duncan would be purely for his gain alone, and although he tells Lady Macbeth that he no longer wants to go through with it, he does not put up much of a fight when she pressures him into doing the deed. The battle between his ambition and his conscience continues as he prepares to murder the sleeping king. He is haunted by a vision of a bloody dagger in Act 2, Scene 1, which speaks to the state of his subconscious, yet it is not enough to deter him from his task. He returns to Lady Macbeth in Scene 3, with both literal and figurative blood on his hands, and instantly feels guilt for what he has done. He confesses that he is no longer able to even say the word Amen, and hears a ghostly voice saying, "Sleep no more, Macbeth does murder sleep." We know that as a soldier, Macbeth is used to bloodshed. So when he says, "I am afraid to think what I have done, look on it again I dare not," it is not due to cowardice or squeamishness, but rather fear of the moral and spiritual consequences. Despite the toll on his mental state, by Act 3, Scene 1, Macbeth is now King of Scotland. But with this new title comes a wave of paranoia regarding the witch's prophecy. If all that they promised him had come true, then it is likely that Banquo's heirs would be the future rulers of Scotland, rather than his own descendants. Although his ambition has carried him to the highest position in the country, he still wants more, and is now determined to secure the throne not only for himself, but for his children as well. He uses this to justify his intended actions, as otherwise everything he has done till now would essentially be for Banquo's descendants, not his. However, his conscience still forbids him to personally carry out the deeds, and he instead hires assassins to kill Banquo and his son Fleance. With each bad decision, he becomes more comfortable tapping into his dark side, and evokes some telling imagery in Act 3, Scene 2, when he says, "Come, sealing night, scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day. Night's black agents to their praise do rouse." He is welcoming the cover of night to hide his sins and shunning the light which would expose him. Later at the banquet in Act 3, Scene 4, he is troubled by yet another supernatural vision, the ghost of Banquo, which sends him into a babbling state of fear. Because nobody else can see the ghost apart from Macbeth, we could interpret this as a manifestation of his guilt, similar to the bloody dagger, although Shakespearean audiences would probably have viewed these apparitions more literally. At any rate, Macbeth is so disturbed by this that he goes off to find the witches again in Act 4, Scene 1, in order to gain their assurances that he is secure in his position. In answer, they show him 3 visions. The first, an armed head, which tells him to beware Macduff. The second, a child covered in blood, which tells him none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. And the third, a child with a crown on his head holding a tree branch, who says Macbeth is safe until Birnam Wood marches against his castle in Dunsinane. Interestingly, Macbeth seems to disregard the first warning completely in favor of the other prophecies, which he takes very literally. He cannot imagine how a child could be born any way apart from a woman, or how a forest can uproot itself and move towards his castle, so he assumes himself safe. However, he is also shown that Banquo's descendants will still be the future kings of Scotland, and this news rekindles his paranoia. This time it is aimed at Macduff's family, because he did not show up to the banquet to support Macbeth. Once again, he orders assassins to carry out the execution on his behalf, due to his inability to reconcile his conscience with the despicable act of murdering women and children. The next time we see Macbeth is in Act 5, Scene 3, where Macbeth is preparing for war against Malcolm's army. There is a distinctive change in his character, which can be partly attributed to him being in his element as a soldier once again. He is also armed with the witch's prophecies and therefore has a certain bravado about him, as he still believes himself untouchable. He is also less emotional, and seems to accept that his present circumstances are due to the consequences of his actions. When he hears a cry signaling the death of Lady Macbeth, he remarks, "I have almost forgot the taste of fears." direness familiar to my slaughterous thoughts cannot once start me. His inner turmoil seems to have quieted, as the news of his wife's death does not trigger another tortured soliloquy, but rather a weary reflection on the pointlessness of life. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He is not allowed to dwell long on this tragedy, as he soon learns that Birnam Wood is marching towards him, which turns out to be nothing more than a cunning disguise employed by Malcolm's army. But even as he begins to realize his doom, he is undeterred and seems to reclaim a piece of his former brave and heroic self, proclaiming, "Blow, wind, come, rack, at least we'll die with harness on our back." Finally, in Act 5, Scene 10, Macbeth comes head-to-head with the nobleman Macduff, who is not born of a woman, but through a C-section. In the face of certain defeat, we are once again reminded of the man we were first introduced to, as he refuses to surrender and kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet. Instead, he chooses to go out on his own terms, exclaiming, "Before my body I throw my warlike shield. Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries, 'Hold, enough!'" As we look at the evolution of Macbeth's character, it is hard not to feel an underlying sense of tragedy throughout the play. Macbeth is a soldier with a distinct sense of right and wrong, as he is very much aware of the despicable nature of his crimes, and carries the weight of them constantly. However, his ambition, or his fatal flaw, is so deeply rooted that he cannot stop his dark side from controlling his actions. His superstitious nature is also detrimental because his fascination with the witches puts him in a state of denial regarding the devious nature of their prophecies. In the end, far from being a forgettable two-dimensional villain, he has remained a subject of great interest to the present day, which may be because his basic character traits are very relatable. At some point we have all experienced feelings of ambition, or a desire to do the wrong thing in order to benefit ourselves. So Macbeth serves as a tragic warning of the consequences of letting these potentially fatal flaws overrule your sense of morality. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content and leave a like or a comment below. See you next time!